Thank you. Thank you all very much. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, distinguished members of Congress, honored guests, and fellow citizens. Only a month ago, I was your guest in this historic building, and I pledged to you my cooperation in doing what is right for this nation that we all love so much. I'm here tonight to reaffirm that pledge and to ask that we share in restoring the promise that is offered to every citizen by this, the last best hope of man on earth. All of us are aware of the punishing inflation which has, for the first time in 60 years, held to double-digit figures for 2 years in a row. Interest rates have reached absurd levels of more than 20% and over 15% for those who would borrow to buy a home. All across this land, one can see newly built homes standing vacant, unsold, because of mortgage interest rates. Almost 8 million Americans are out of work. These are people who want to be productive. But as the months go by, despair dominates their lives. The threats of layoff and unemployment hang over other millions, and all who work are frustrated by their inability to keep up with inflation. One worker in a Midwest city put it to me this way. He said, "I'm bringing home more dollars than I ever believed I could possibly earn, but I seem to be getting worse off." And he is. Not only have hourly earnings of the American worker, after adjusting for inflation, declined 5% over the past 5 years, but in these 5 years, federal personal taxes for the average family have increased 67%. We can no longer procrastinate and hope that things will get better. They will not. Unless we act forcefully, and now, the economy will get worse. Can we who man the ship of state deny it is somewhat out of control? Our national debt is approaching $1 trillion. A few weeks ago, I called such a figure, $1 trillion, incomprehensible. And I've been trying ever since to think of a way to illustrate how big $1 trillion really is. And the best I could come up with is that if you had a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand, only 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high. The interest on the public debt this year, we know, will be over $90 billion. And unless we change the proposed spending for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, we'll add another almost $80 billion to the debt. Adding to our troubles is a mass of regulations imposed on the shopkeeper, the farmer, the craftsman, professionals, and major industry that is estimated to add $100 billion to the price of the things we buy, and it reduces our ability to produce. The rate of increase in American productivity, once one of the highest in the world, is among the lowest of all major industrial nations. Indeed, it has actually declined in the last 3 years. Now, I've painted a pretty grim picture, but I think I've painted it accurately. It is within our power to change this picture, and we can act with hope. There's nothing wrong with our internal strengths. There has been no breakdown in the human, technological, and natural resources upon which the economy is built. Based on this confidence in a system which has never failed us, but which we have failed through a lack of confidence and sometimes through a belief that we could fine-tune the economy and get a tune to our liking, I am proposing a comprehensive 4-point program. Now let me outline in detail some of the principal parts of this program. You'll each be provided with a completely detailed copy of the entire program. This plan is aimed at reducing the growth in government spending and taxing, reforming and eliminating regulations which are unnecessary and unproductive or counterproductive, and encouraging a consistent monetary policy aimed at maintaining the value of the currency. If enacted in full, this program can help America create 13 million new jobs, nearly 3 million more than we would have without these measures. It will also help us to gain control of inflation. It's important to note that we're only reducing the rate of increase in taxing and spending. We are not attempting to
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Good morning, everyone. Jan Morgan on this beautiful Friday morning, filling in for Paul Harrell. You are with us at the intersection of conservative ideas and reality, building a liberty machine. That's what we're doing here at Conduit. And I tell you what, we can't do it without your help. There are so many ways that you can help us get the word, the truth, out to the people of Arkansas. And after all, Conduit News is the number one source of conservative news and politics in the state of Arkansas. You can help us get that truth out to the people by checking out our website, www.conduitnews.com, our Twitter page, our Facebook page. Conduit is all over the place getting the truth out. And on that note, I want to introduce to you the lady sitting on the set with me. This is Michelle McMillan. She is the CEO of Wounded Healer Project and also the founder of Women for Arkansas Against Issue 1. And Issue 1, the reason I asked Michelle to be on with me this morning is Issue 1 is a huge deal. It has been a big story across the state. It has steadily grown and gained momentum as people around the state began to debate this issue. And it has been a very divisive issue. It's about tort reform. For those of you listening who don't know, it's about tort reform. And, it really has come down to the decision between how much, which branch of our government should be making decisions. Is this a violation of our constitutional rights? And actually, yesterday, something really big happened on that front. Listen to what happened. A judge in Arkansas declared that Issue 1 was unconstitutional, that it should be removed from the ballot. So,
big win.
Big win. Yes, Michelle. Now, I want to know, first of all, when you heard that news, as the leader of the organization, Women Against Issue 1, what were your thoughts? Were you surprised?
I actually cried.
Cried
happy. No.
Okay.
I know we're going to win at the ballot.
Okay.
I know this. But I just cried because I felt like that we still have, a voice in the state of Arkansas. And it felt relieved to know that we had a judge that could not be bought and that he would, still stick to the Constitution, which is what we've been arguing with Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1. This is a Constitution issue. And I literally cried. Chills still.
Right. Well, it depends on who you talk to, because, and the reason I say this is so divisive is we've been talking all week about, these issues that are dividing the Republican Party. And we're really seeing a division between the conservative base and the more moderate Republican. And this issue is one of them that has, because you've got Republicans on both sides of this issue. We've had Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin has come out and supported Issue 1. And then you have very conservative folks on the other side. You've got Conduit News, for example, that has said Issue 1 is not a good thing. And it is about the Constitution. So what made you decide to even create this organization and get into this?
I work with veterans, been an advocate for veterans, and I was working on HR 1215, which was a price tag on veterans for on a federal level for $250,000 minus net worth if there was a medical malpractice or cause of death. And so fighting that on a federal level, and just like you, when you came back to the state, I was in a meeting and I was told about Issue 1. And I could not believe that in my own state that we were having an amendment being put in front of us with the price of life.
The price tag.
The price tag.
Basically, the jury it loses its power to decide individually.
Right. Article 2, Section 7, or, even if you go to the U.S. Constitution, trial by jury. And I was floored and so angry. And I said, not on my clock.
Right.
And so just, came up with Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1. We actually had, in the last 28 days, we've had 48.5 thousand hits.
Wow.
And
on the Facebook page.
On the Facebook
Women
alone.
Against Issue
And
1.
then we're touring the state. And starting next week, we will roll meetings across the entire state of Women Arkansas Against Issue 1.
What has been the response statewide? You're speaking to various groups around the state, trying to educate them, because there are so many people still that don't even know what this issue is about.
You're right. And when I, talk to people and they do not know what is going on, it makes me feel like that when they say that people asked for this, there's no way that people asked for it. I've been around the entire state.
Right.
And so that tells me that this is more truly about the corporations asked for this.
Yes, because then there's a cap on the amount of damages that can be awarded in a lawsuit. So some have said that would create an atmosphere where corporations would not have to do right by the people because they know it's only going to cost them this much and they have much more to gain financially by just doing what they want.
It's an anti-accountability bill.
Right.
And it's capping the person that's been injured. The other side, they can still, pay their attorneys as much as they want to. And here as the victim, is very limited. And if you look at Texas, you look at the Professor Black from Northwest University of Chicago, he has looked at all the states statistically. And the argument that you're hearing on the other side does not show that this is the truth.
Right.
And so, I believe that we have a battle.
I'm wondering, because anytime women get serious and passionate about something, things get done.
You're exactly right.
I was amazed because I wasn't aware that Women Against Issue 1, Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1 existed until I was looking on Facebook last night and just trying to get updates on what was going on. And I saw the page and I saw this large group of people gathered and I was like, wow, the page is growing. Just because this judge came out with this decision yesterday, does that mean this battle is over?
Absolutely not. And it actually scares me. I mean, it's a win, because it...
But it's a temporary win because it's going to the Supreme Court.
It's a temporary win. But what was scary is, yesterday we saw people posting, it's off the ballot. It's dead. It's not dead
yet.
Until the, Supreme Court rules and takes it off the ballot. It's not dead. And so happy, but scared, because we don't want you to stop delivering the message that we have to vote against Issue 1. And so, you're worried, but then you're like, okay, we're just going to trust the citizens of Arkansas that we believe in justice, that we trust our 12 jurors.
Mm-hmm.
We do not need to trust our legislators.
Right.
And that we're going to win at the ballot.
Have you been speaking more to like Tea Party groups, or has it been Republican groups, or just been citizen groups in general?
Citizens groups, Tea Parties, Rotary clubs, mom groups. We've spoke everywhere.
Because this really shouldn't be a partisan issue. When you're talking about a right, regardless of what political party you align yourself with, you should want to, to stick with the constitutional rights of citizens. And yet, of course, one party over the other seems to have more of a problem with that. But within our own Republican Party, except that even within our own party, you've got so much division over this one issue, and people that normally are united, as a united front, have found themselves divided on this particular issue because it does get down to, who's going, the big corporations controlling what kind of, putting a price tag on human life, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to step on the constitutional right of a citizen simply because of a financial need of corporations. That's basically what we're looking at.
Right. Issue 1, you hear it's frivolous lawsuits. It doesn't even, address that. And that's the summary. That's what they want you to believe. It's that bait and switch,
Right.
But what is so worrisome about this is that when you go to, I tell people, read page 6, read page 7, and it's that it gives the legislators power over the judicial system. And we have 3 branches for a reason.
Right.
And, if one branch is not working, that branch fixes it. And, to me, what is so upset is we have, legislators that are so smart, so intelligent. And I believe that as citizens of Arkansas and Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1, If we cannot fix the problem by taking away and restricting jurors and the victims. If we want, I don't know if you know that, we have malpractice is the third leading cause of death in the United States. About 440,000 people die a year from medical negligence.
Right.
And this is not going to fix that. And so to me, it's about, we are so intelligent, let's come together and let's fix why people are dying. And I think that, for our state, we can be the example to all the other states of how we fix this, that people don't die.
Right. And on that note, when people go to the ballot box to vote, these amendments are so complicated and they're so long. Unless you cannot wait until you get to the ballot box to decide how you're going to vote on an issue. And tort reform, when people hear tort reform, they say, oh, well, I support tort reform. We need tort reform, but be sure you read everything that's in it.
Okay.
You need to know what's in it before, you may support tort reform, but do you support it at the risk of losing your constitutional right and transferring the balance of power there?
I think that, to me, it's nowhere says it's going to bring jobs. If you look at Texas, it did not bring more doctors.
Yes, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin said in his pitch for issue 1, he said that this is about, saving the corporations. This is about, bringing more business to Arkansas. That in the state of Texas, things changed dramatically when they had tort reform.
Then he's misinformed. We have to stop.
I'll tell the Lieutenant Governor you said he's misinformed.
I will tell you, you're misinformed.
Did you hear that, Tim?
You are misinformed, Tim. You have to look at the scientific evidence.
Right.
We have to stop listening to the corporations because they have to gain. And we should not tell the citizens of Arkansas that we're going to let the corporations keep their money at the cost of the citizens of Arkansas. And if you are delivering that message, you are failing and you are not taking your oath seriously.
Michelle, it is really easy for us as citizens to say, don't listen to corporations. But those politicians, they listen to corporations because that's where their money comes for reelection. And so that's when it really gets down to, you have to look at your politicians and say, okay, are they representing a viewpoint because they think this is truly in the best interest of the people, or are they representing a viewpoint because it's truly in the best interest of big money? So always keep that in mind when we're talking about politicians. And we have much more to discuss on this issue. And also, this is going to be a great show. We've got a lot in this show. We have, coming up, we have the superintendent of Lake Hamilton Schools. And if that sounds kind of, you say, wait a minute, Lake Hamilton, where did I hear that recently? It's because Lake Hamilton made national news because the United States Attorney General visited Garland County, right here where we're broadcasting from, not from the gun cave, but visited the school district to look at what they're doing. And what they're doing is allowing teachers with concealed handgun licenses to be armed on campus as a way of keeping their schools safe. And what we're hoping is that the United States Attorney General will look at that program and say, you know what, this is something we might need to consider for all schools across America. We're going to be talking about that with the superintendent, find out how that visit went and how that whole concept is working out for them right after this break. Stay with us.
Cut either spending or taxing levels below that which we presently have. This plan will get our economy moving again, productivity growth, and thus create the jobs that our people must have. And I'm asking that you join me in reducing direct federal spending by $41.4 billion in fiscal year 1982, along with another And this goes along with another $7.7 billion in user fees and off-budget savings for a total of $49.1 billion. And this will still allow an increase of $40.8 billion over 1981 spending. Now, I know that exaggerated and inaccurate stories about these cuts have disturbed many people, particularly those dependent on grant and benefit programs for their basic needs. Some of you have heard from constituents I know, afraid that Social Security checks, for example, were going to be taken away from them. Well, I regret the fear that these unfounded stories have caused, and I welcome this opportunity to set things straight. we will continue to fulfill the obligations that spring from our national conscience. Those who, through no fault of their own, must depend on the rest of us, the poverty-stricken, the disabled, the elderly, all those with true need, can rest assured that the social safety net of programs they depend on are exempt from any cuts. The full retirement benefits of the more than 31 million Social Security recipients will be continued along with an annual cost of living increase. Medicare will not be cut, nor will supplemental income for the blind, the aged, and the disabled, and funding will continue for veterans' pensions. School breakfasts and lunches for the children of low-income families will continue, as will nutrition and other special services for the aging. There will be no cut in Project Head Start or summer youth jobs. All in all, nearly $216 billion worth of programs providing help for tens of millions of Americans will be fully funded. But government will not continue to subsidize individuals or particular business interests where real need cannot be demonstrated. And while we will reduce some subsidies to regional and local governments, we will at the same time convert a number of categorical grant programs into block grants to reduce wasteful administrative overhead and to give local governments and states more flexibility and control. We call for an end in duplication to federal programs and reform of those which are not cost effective. Now already, some have protested that there must be no reduction in aid to schools. Well, let me point out that federal aid to education amounts to only 8% of the total educational funding. And for this 8%, the federal government has insisted on tremendously disproportionate share of control over our schools. Whatever reductions we've proposed in that 8% will amount to very little in the total cost of education. They will, however, restore more authority to states and local school districts. Historically, the American people have supported, by voluntary contributions, more artistic and cultural activities than all the other countries in the world put together. I wholeheartedly support this approach and believe that Americans will continue their generosity. Therefore, I'm proposing
on to us. All right, looks like we are back. Jan Morgan here with Michelle McMillan. We have been talking about issue 1, a big decision coming down the pipe yesterday on that, but that a judge said that issue 1 is unconstitutional and it should be removed from the ballot. Well, that has to be decided now by the Arkansas Supreme Court because that's going to be appealed. But with me, Michelle McMillan, she is with me because she is also the founder of Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1. But she also, and I asked her to talk with us this last segment before she leaves, about another big organization that she's involved in called the Wounded Healer Project. She is the CEO, and you know that what you're doing must be pretty big and having impact when the Deputy Director of Veterans Affairs calls you.
That's
so
correct.
For people that don't understand, first of all, explain what is Wounded Healer Project?
The Wounded Healer Project is an organization. We work with veterans who suffer with PTSD, suicide, and drug issues, and where the VA has found them. And we help with paperwork, from feeding to whatever their needs
What do
are.
you mean? This is volunteers?
Volunteers.
All volunteers, okay. So tell me about this call from the Veterans Affairs Deputy Director.
Deputy Director of Veteran Affairs called me, asked me to come meet with him, and honored, absolutely honored to meet with him because my organization was to come together with everyone to fix the issue about.
But the issue is with the way they're operating.
It is.
Yes.
And
so was it a congenial call?
it was. He probably didn't like all the numbers I gave him, but I said, these are your numbers.
Right.
And people are misinformed when they think 22 veterans a day commit suicide, and that only comes from 20 states. And it does not come from Texas and California, which you could imagine what those numbers are. And it also, if they have committed suicide within 120 days coming from deployment, it does not count them in that number.
Really?
Or if they retire. And so 22 is not the real number.
So it's much worse than that.
The real number is around 113 a day.
Goodness. That is shocking.
So, correct.
And that's from the Veterans Affairs.
Department of Veteran Affairs, Radiology, Department of Health. We pulled death certificates in Texas and California to get a true number. And so when I realized the number, to me, you cannot fix any of the problems until we talk about all of them. And so that's my argument on this is the suicide hotline. A lot of people do not realize that 53% of those calls are what get answered. We're not answering at 95, 100%. And my organization called for 24 hours. We did 41 calls. And on the 41 calls, only one told us to call 911.
Wow.
And so it's a serious problem.
Yes.
And to me, you know, if someone writes that blank check and they serve our country, we owe it to them that when they come back, if they come back broken, if they come back suicidal, depression, that we are there for them. We are the support system they need. And we
They should have the best of care.
Best of care.
Right. But, you know, Michelle, on that note, and I've never had a chance to talk to you about this regarding your project, but there was a period of time when if you're a veteran and you have PTSD, or certainly even if you just ask the VA to assist you with your finances, yes, for any financial assistance, then you get your name gets put on a list that is sent to NIC's background check system, and you lose your gun rights.
Correct, still is.
Well, Senator Grassley was supposed to be looking at that. So wait, you just looked at it, and then that's about it. Okay, I can tell the expression on your face. People on the radio can't see the expression on your face. So it is still a problem because veterans in America were the largest group of people who were being turned in to the NIC's background check system simply because they asked for help with their finances. And what it did is the VA was putting them on a list of people that categorized you as mentally incompetent. Correct. Just because you wanted help with your finances, you become categorized as mentally incompetent, so you lose your gun rights.
Which you can be categorized that if you have a sleep disorder, breathing disorder, all those things. Also, a lot of people do not know when they come back from deployment.
Mentally incompetent if you have a sleep disorder?
It can flag you.
Wow.
And so what a lot of people do not realize also is when they come, they fill out a form from back deployment, you know, on their mental health, how they are feeling. And actually, the Deputy Director of Veteran Affairs did not even know this, that form was not created by talking with veterans. Mm-hmm. It was made by Pfizer.
I'm so shocked that Pfizer didn't get it right. You know,
and
I'm also shocked that in a government organization, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
That's right.
So, but you know, I know for a fact, Michelle, because I know veterans who have suffered with PTSD, but will not go to the VA and get help. Why? Because they know the minute they do, they're going to lose their gun rights.
And they're also, when they're suicidal, they're scared they're going to be locked up.
And they're scared they're going to be labeled mentally incompetent.
I've gone to a couple of veterans' houses where, you know, they've had the gun to their head. And one of them, it took me 6 hours to talk him down. And he would have done it. If we would have called the police, he would have done suicide by call. But it was scared to death to go to the VA. And we have to change that. We owe that to them, that we will let them come to us and we will support them without taking their constitutional rights away.
Well, I really appreciate what you guys are doing with this project. If somebody wants to get involved with the organization and help and volunteer for veterans, how do they do that?
They can go to Wounded Healer Project, Michelle McMillan on Facebook, Women of Arkansas Against Issue 1, very easy to find. We have Wounded Healer Project on Facebook also, but we would love to have help. All
right. Thank you so much, Michelle McMillan, Wounded Healer Project. We'll be back with more Conduit News after this break. Stay tuned.
A savings of $85 million in the federal subsidies now going to the arts and humanities. There are a number of subsidies to business and industry that I believe are unnecessary. not because the activities being subsidized aren't of value, but because the marketplace contains incentives enough to warrant continuing these activities without a government subsidy. One such subsidy is the Department of Energy's Synthetic Fuels Program. We will continue support of research leading to development of new technologies and more independence from foreign oil. But we can save at least $3.2 billion by leaving to private industry the building of plants to make liquid or gas fuels from coal. We're asking that another major industry, business subsidy I should say, the Export-Import Bank Loan Authority be reduced by 1/3 in 1982. We're doing this because the primary beneficiaries of taxpayer funds in this case are the exporting companies themselves, most of them profitable corporations. This brings me to a number of other lending programs in which government makes low-interest loans, some of them at an interest rate as low as 2%. What has not been very well understood is that the Treasury Department has no money of its own to lend. It has to go into the private capital market and borrow the money. So in this time of excessive interest rates, the government finds itself borrowing at an interest rate several times as high as the interest it gets back from those it lends the money to. And this difference, of course, is paid by your constituents, the taxpayers. They get hit again if they try to borrow because government borrowing contributes to raising all interest rates. By terminating the Economic Development Administration, we can save hundreds of millions of dollars in 1982 and billions more over the next few years. There's a lack of consistent and convincing evidence that EDA and its regional commissions have been effective in creating new jobs. They have been effective in creating an array of planners, grantsmen, and professional middlemen. We believe we can do better just by the expansion of the economy and the job creation which will come from our economic program. The food stamp program will be restored to its original purpose, to assist those without resources to purchase sufficient nutritional food. We will, however, save $1.8 billion in fiscal year 1982 by removing from eligibility those who are not in real need or who are abusing the program. But even with this reduction, the program will be budgeted for more than $10 billion. We will tighten welfare and give more attention to outside sources of income when determining the amount of welfare an individual is allowed. This, plus strong and effective work requirements, will save $520 million in the next year. I stated a moment ago our intention to keep the school breakfast and lunch programs for those in true need. But by cutting back on meals for children of families who can afford to pay, the savings will be $1.6 billion in fiscal year 1982. Now let me just touch on a few other areas which are typical of the kind of reductions we've included in this economic package. The Trade Adjustment Assistance Program provides benefits for workers who are unemployed when foreign imports reduce the market for various American products, causing shutdown of plants and layoff of workers. The purpose is to help these workers find jobs in growing sectors of our economy.
Welcome back. Jan Morgan here with you, filling in for Paul Harrell, vacationing Paul Harrell. He will be back on Monday. This has been quite an honor to fill in for him. I appreciate you bearing with me as we work through this week. With us on the phone is Joey McCutcheon, and Joey has been at the forefront of this battle in the state of Arkansas on the issue 1, tort reform, that was supposed to be on the ballot. And as we speak, a judge has just late yesterday issued his decision that issue 1 is unconstitutional and it should be removed from the ballot. So, Joey, thank you so much for joining us. Are you there?
Thank you, Jan. I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So, how did you feel when you heard that judge's decision yesterday?
Well, I felt not necessarily good, because what I want to do, Jan, is I want the people to decide this in November to finally put this issue behind us, this infringement upon the people's right that is so-called named tort reform. So bottom line is I want to win in November. Legislators and special interests say they want to give the people, that's the only reason they're putting this out is to give the people the chance to vote. Well, I think it's time to vote. I think it's time for the people to vote, is what I think.
So you must be feeling pretty good about the response that you've had across the state. And by the way, Michelle McMillan, before the break, I was talking to her about how to introduce you, as whether it's with the Liberty Defense Organization. And she said, introduce you as a member of the Arkansas Women Against Issue 1. So you guys working together, I know, but yeah, so you must have been feeling pretty good about the response that you've been getting across the state, because I know it's a tough job to educate people on something that seems so complex. Can you put it in a nutshell for people what the issue is here?
Yeah, it's really amazing, the coalition of folks on the left, folks on the right. You've got the Arkansas Family Council with Jerry Cox. You've got the AFL-CIO. You have Conduit for Action. You have Conservative Arkansas. You have Second Amendment advocates, as you are one, who are obviously jumping in and standing up for the Seventh Amendment here in our Constitution, our Arkansas Constitution. We call it Article 2, Section 7, that the right to trial by jury shall remain inviolate. So the coalitions have been amazing. People.
That's why, Joey, when you sent me a text almost a year ago, it seems like, and asking where I stand on issue 1, I almost laughed, because you should know that Jan Morgan is always going to support. Jan is always about the Constitution and the constitutional rights, and then there's no excuse. There's absolutely no excuse to trample the rights of the people, and this clearly is one. And yet I'm wondering, because you've been out there and you've been talking to Republican Party organizations, Tea Party organizations, citizens groups, anybody that would basically listen to you. And I wonder if you found it interesting that even within the Republican Party and the Tea Parties, that there was a divide on this issue, because, both parties are supposed to be about the rights of the people. And this is very clearly a constitutional issue.
Yeah, I've over the years, I've been very disappointed in my party, the Republican Party, that they have fronted this. Sometimes it seems like it's party over people. But I think people, when they actually see what this is doing, for example, when they see that this issue, what Judge Pierce ruled on is this was violative of the Article 19, Section 22 of our Constitution. So again, it's about the Constitution. This is simply another government overreach produced by our legislature and the special interests that are controlling them. That's what this is all about. We're trying to cram 4 sections into something that's only supposed to be one amendment, and that's.
I wanted to hear from you. It is. I wanted to hear from you before we go to a break. I wanted to hear from you, the Lieutenant Governor, who's always been, I thought it was part of the conservative base of the Republican Party, and yet the Lieutenant Governor came out and spoke in support of issue 1. Was that? I want to know what your feelings were when you saw that. That became a big story.
It's no surprise that he's part and parcel of Karl Rove, and it's very disturbing that we have a lieutenant governor who's supposed to stand up for right, yet this places an arbitrary value on life, who's supposed to be standing up for our Constitution, and clearly even this piece of legislation is unconstitutional.
Okay.
I mean, what does our lieutenant governor thinks it means when the right to trial by jury shall be inviolate? So, very disturbing. Number one, I think that the lieutenant governor position should be abolished anyway. It's a do-nothing job, and all he's doing is flitting around, my words, running for governor. And I don't think it's right. I think he needs to get a real job and quit living off the taxpayers' dime.
All right. Well, there you go. Joey McCutcheon never backing off of sharing how he really feels on a situation. Joey, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to have you back on a little later today with our 7 o'clock hour to talk more about this issue. Thank you so much for calling in. And we'll be checking with you. And congratulations on your a win yesterday with one of our judges. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we've got a lot more of Conduit news. We got a packed show. We're going to talk with the Superintendent of Schools of Lake Hamilton Schools about a visit from the United States Attorney General, as well as we're going to visit with Josh Waters of Conduit News about the bribery scheme sentencing, which continues. More on that after the break. Stay with us.
Nothing wrong with that. But because these benefits are paid out on top of normal unemployment benefits, we wind up paying greater benefits to those who lose their jobs because of foreign competition than we do to their friends and neighbors who are laid off due to domestic competition. Anyone must agree that this is unfair. Putting these two programs on the same footing will save $1.15 billion in just 1 year. Earlier, I made mention of changing categorical grants to states and local governments into block grants. Now, we know, of course, that the categorical grant programs burden local and state governments with a mass of federal regulations and federal paperwork. Ineffective targeting, wasteful administrative overhead, all can be eliminated by shifting the resources and decision-making authority to local and state government. This will also consolidate programs which are scattered throughout the federal bureaucracy, bringing government closer to the people and saving $23.9 billion over the next 5 years. Our program for economic renewal deals with a number of programs which at present are not cost-effective. An example is Medicaid. Right now, Washington provides the states with unlimited matching payments for their expenditures. At the same time, we here in Washington pretty much dictate how the states are going to manage those programs. We want to put a cap on how much the federal government will contribute, but at the same time allow the states much more flexibility in managing and structuring the programs. I know from our experience in California that such flexibility could have led to far more cost-effective reforms. Now, this will bring a savings of $1 billion next year. The space program has been and is important to America, and we plan to continue it. We believe, however, that a reordering of priorities to focus on the most important and cost-effective NASA programs can result in a savings of $250,000. Now, coming down from space to the mailbox, the Postal Service has been consistently unable to live within its operating budget. It is still dependent on large federal subsidies. We propose reducing those subsidies by $632 million in 1982 to press the Postal Service into becoming more effective. And in subsequent years, the savings will continue to add up. The Economic Regulatory Administration and the Department of Energy has programs to force companies to convert to specific fuels.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, Contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
It has the authority to administer a gas rationing plan, and prior to decontrol, it ran the oil price control program. With these and other regulations gone, we can save several hundreds of millions of dollars over the next few years. I'm sure there's one department you've been waiting for me to mention, the Department of Defense. It's the only department in our entire program that will actually be increased over the present budgeted figure. But even here, there was no exemption. The Department of Defense came up with a number of cuts which reduced the budget increase needed to restore our military balance. These measures will save $2.9 billion in 1982 outlays, and by 1986, a total of $28.2 billion will have been saved, or perhaps I should say will have been made available for the necessary things that we must do. The aim will be to provide the most effective defense for the lowest possible cost. I believe that my duty as president requires that I recommend increases in defense spending over the coming years. I know that you're all aware, but I think it bears saying again that since 1970, the Soviet Union has invested $300 billion more in its military forces than we have. As a result of its massive military buildup, the Soviets have made a significant numerical advantage in strategic nuclear delivery systems, tactical aircraft, submarines, artillery, and anti-aircraft defense. To allow this imbalance to continue is a threat to our national security. Notwithstanding our economic straits, making the financial changes beginning now is far less costly than waiting and having to attempt a crash program several years from now.
Okay, welcome back. We're going to try this again. Some technical issues today, and I'm just going to attribute that to the thunderstorms that are around us in Arkansas. We've had a tough time with that, knocking us on and off the air. So anyway, as I was saying before the break, this has been a difficult week for our state especially for the Republican Party on the front of the bribery schemes. We had State Senator Jeremy Hutchinson indicted. And then we started the sentencing this week of other legislators who were already indicted and found guilty, convicted. We started the sentencing phase of those. Today, we've got Randall G. Shelton Jr., because last night, we're going to talk about him today, because last night he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Now, he was supposedly an accomplice in a kickback scheme involving state grants. Josh Waters with Conduit is with us. Josh was there for that sentencing, as it's been for throughout the sentencing phases and the trials. Josh, tell us a little bit about what kind of sentence he got and what's next.
Hey, Jen. Morning. Yes, Randall Shelton did get 6 years and 72 months in federal prison. After that, he'll be on 3 years supervised release. He's ordered to pay restitution of over $660,000, and he will have assets seized over at $664,000. And so he is allowed to self-report to prison, and he has to self-report by Monday, October 8th. And just a little caveat on that, there is some ways he could possibly avoid that, but I think at this point, those possibilities are a little lower, because Mr. Shelton did yesterday issue a statement. We did not hear that from former Senator John Woods on Wednesday, but Randall Shelton did issue a very passionate statement to the judge right before the sentence came down. He said he was full of sorrow and pain. He apologized for hurting the people of Arkansas, for hurting Ecclesia College, and for hurting his family. And he pleaded for mercy because for the sake of his family and his newborn baby. But ultimately, the judge said he thought he felt remorseful, but that he wasn't truly accepting the actions of his conduct, and that he had to send a message to other middlemen like him who might be thinking about doing the same thing he did and stealing money from the taxpayers.
So the whole tone of the courtroom with that kind of plea, with an impassioned plea like that for mercy, must have felt entirely different than the atmosphere where John Woods, former Senator John Woods, really, he didn't say anything. And basically what you told us was there was hardly any reaction from him when his sentence came down, which, if the viewers are not aware of that, or the listeners, he was about 18 years in prison and close to or over $2 million in fines.
Yes, that's right. It was a very, very different tone in the courtroom yesterday. Mr. Shelton, and really throughout the case had really had a different demeanor, and the judge recognized that, and he recognized the fact that Shelton did show remorse. He cried really throughout. His parents were there. His wife was there, and they were visibly upset. His mother spoke on his behalf towards the end, and she was very upset. And that was kind of a sadder moment that this family had been ruined. And U.S. Attorney Dak Keys mentioned that Randall Shelton has kind of ruined part of his family because of his actions. But U.S. Attorney Dak Keys also mentioned that with the scheme that they had cooked up and implemented, that they had considered the consequences, they considered how it would affect his family, and ignored those consequences, steal more and more money from the taxpayers.
Right. So, what do you expect to happen next? Tell us what's coming down the pike. First of all, there are going to be more sentencing hearings, but also the U.S. Attorney yesterday said, and I don't think anyone missed this, that much more is coming. This investigation is far from over.
Yes. So next week there will be 2 more sentencings in this specific case around the kickbacks through Ecclesia College. That'll be former State Representative Micah Neal, who ended up taking a plea deal and worked with the government and actually testified in this case against John Wood and Randall Shelton. So he will have his sentencing next week, as will Orrin Paris, the former president of Ecclesia College, who was involved in this. He also took a plea deal. He did not testify at trial, but are saying he did cooperate with the government and help them in their case against Woods and Shelton. And they didn't have like a little press gaggle like they had after John Woods yesterday, but I did ask U.S. Attorney Dak Keys if it was safe to assume, all these other legislators that have been, named as sponsoring GIF grants to Ecclesia or the Arkansas Health and Economic Research, their names have kind of been lumped in with this. It says it's safe to assume that they're not going to be charged in any of this. And he said that was a really good question, but he couldn't really comment or say anything on that yet, but that he hopes to be able to say something about that sooner than later. And so I think that really puts a question mark still on where are we. We know there's other investigations going on. So who's going to be, the next name to drop or be indicted or enter a plea deal? So it's not over by any means. The corruption in Arkansas and the justice.
Right. Is there any indication, Josh, that any of these guys are going to turn and start helping the state more because of the sentences that they've received?
That's a really good question, because the judge did push back a little yesterday whenever he was delivering his sentence, how, Randall Shelton kind of came down before him and was asking for mercy and apologized for his actions and saying it was his actions alone to give John Woods money. And he pushed back saying, he thought that was a little unfortunate because for over 18 months, I think at one point he said he hurled everything at the wall, meaning his attorneys tried to make every argument possible to get out of this. He made him put on a full month-long trial, go through this entire process, and at the very end, almost seemed to, admit his guilt without admitting it, of course, for appeal purposes. But so I thought that was interesting. But, I think these sentences, Jan, really do send the messages to any other middlemen who are involved and any other former legislators that are involved is, if you don't cooperate and go all the way through and fight this, when we, have all the information on you. And the judge talked about that, how there's a mountain of evidence, and how it was laid out so succinctly and almost in a second-by-second and minute-by-minute fashion showing the crimes that they committed. And so I think a clear message has been sent to other people who might be involved or not cooperating, that they need to cooperate to avoid these large sentences that have been handed out.
Okay, for the folks who are not familiar with the bribery schemes involving Ecclesia College, tell us what's going to be happening next week. What are the guys who are accused next week? I know we're talking about was it Orrin Paris, I believe. Tell us who you're going to be covering next week.
So Orrin Paris was the former president of Ecclesia College, and for those who might not be familiar with the bribery scheme at all, what Senator John Woods did was found a way to send GIF grants, which is taxpayer money, to Ecclesia College. Ecclesia College then, through sham consulting agreements, paid Randall Shelton portions of the money they got, and then Randall Shelton then passed along that money to Senator John Woods. Micah Neal, a former state representative, also did, not to the same extent Woods did, but also supported grants and got kickbacks through Shelton and Woods. And so Micah Neal will be sentenced next week for his role, and then Orrin Paris will be sentenced for his role as he was the president. He was the one overseeing, everything from the Ecclesia end. So I do anticipate them to get lighter sentences because they entered plea deals and because they cooperated with the government. But that's who the players are that'll be sentenced next week.
And hasn't the gift fund, the fund that has been at the center of all the bribery schemes, hasn't that been declared by the state Supreme Court unconstitutional? The whole concept of that fund?
Yes, it's been declared unconstitutional twice. And one of the comments that stuck out to me on that yesterday from Judge Brooks was that John Woods worked very hard to get around what I thought was pretty clear Supreme Court precedent saying you can't do GIF money like this. You can't just, basically have this as a slush fund for legislators to dole out for, kind of as a re-election slush fund, so to speak. And so it had already been ruled unconstitutional, and he set up a procedure to try to get around that. And it has since he did all this, it has since, been ruled unconstitutional again, and it is not being operated like it was when all this money was flowing out.
Well, doesn't the governor have a fund that's similar to this with the same kind of just general lack of oversight that he can just give to businesses that he chooses? Isn't there a similar fund? And if so, if the state Supreme Court says that it's unconstitutional for legislators to dole out this kind of money without any real legislative oversight, shouldn't the same be said for the governor's discretionary fund? Or is that different?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jen. I think you're probably talking about the Quick Action Closing Fund, which is basically just a corporate welfare slush fund. So in Arkansas, to spend the taxpayers' money, you're supposed to get 3/4 vote, majority vote from the House and Senate. And basically they set up that fund and some other funds to kind of get around that requirement. And so I think that's something that should be watched. But you're exactly right. It's basically another form of a slush fund. Well,
I'm watching it. I've been watching it, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your insight and your very thorough coverage of the bribery scheme trials and the hearings and sentencing. So thank you so much. We're going to be back, folks, with much more Conduit news after this. And remember, when we're talking about gift money and Quick Action Closing Fund, that's your money, your tax dollars that have been misused. Stay with us.
Talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
We remain committed to the goal of arms limitation through negotiation. I hope we can persuade our adversaries to come to realistic, balanced, and verifiable agreements. But as we negotiate, our security must be fully protected by a balanced and realistic defense program. Now, let me say a word here about the general problem of waste and fraud in the federal government. One government estimate indicated that fraud alone may account for anywhere from 1 to 10%, as much as $25 billion of federal expenditures for social programs. If the tax dollars that are wasted or mismanaged are added to this fraud total, the staggering dimensions of this problem begin to emerge. The Office of Management and Budget is now putting together an interagency task force to attack waste and fraud. We're also planning to appoint as inspectors general highly trained professionals who will spare no effort to do this job. No administration can promise to immediately stop a trend that has grown in recent years as quickly as government expenditures themselves. But let me say this: waste and fraud in the federal government is exactly what I've called it before: an unrelenting national scandal, a scandal we're bound and determined to do something about. Marching in lockstep with the whole program of reductions in spending is the equally important program of reduced tax rates. Both are essential if we're to have economic recovery. It's time to create new jobs, to build and rebuild industry, and to give the American people room to do what they do best. And that can only be done with a tax program which provides incentive to increase productivity for both workers and industry. Our proposal is for a 10% across-the-board cut every year for 3 years in the tax rates for all individual income taxpayers, make a total cut in tax rates of 30%. This 3-year reduction will also apply to the tax on unearned income, leading toward an eventual elimination of the present differential between the tax on earned and unearned income. Now, I would have hoped that we could be retroactive with this. But as it stands, the effective starting date for these 10% personal income tax rate reductions will call for as of July 1st of this year. Again, let me remind you that while this 30% reduction will leave the taxpayers with $500 billion more in their pockets over the next 5 years, it's actually only a reduction in the tax increase already built into the system. Unlike some past quote-unquote tax reforms, this is not merely a shift of wealth between different sets of taxpayers. This proposal for an equal reduction in everyone's tax rates will expand our national prosperity, enlarge national incomes, and increase opportunities for all Americans. Some will argue, I know, that reducing tax rates now will be inflationary. A solid body of economic experts does not agree. And tax cuts adopted over the past 3/4 of a century indicate these economic experts are right. They will not be inflationary. I've had advice that in 1985, our real production in goods and services will grow by 20% and be $300 billion higher than it is today. The average worker's wage will rise in real purchasing power 8%. And this is in after-tax dollars. And this, of course, is predicated on a complete program of tax cuts and spending reductions being implemented. The other part of the tax package is aimed directly at providing business and industry with the capital needed to modernize and engage in more research and development. This will involve an increase in depreciation allowances. And this part of our tax proposal will be retroactive to January 1st. The present depreciation system is obsolete, needlessly complex, and economically counterproductive. Very simply, it bases the depreciation of plant, machinery, and vehicles and tools on their original cost with no recognition of how inflation has increased their replacement cost. We're proposing a much shorter write-off time than is presently allowed. A 5-year write-off for machinery, 3 years for vehicles and trucks, and a 10-year write-off for plant. In fiscal year 1992, under this plan, business would acquire
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. Conduit News, the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. I'm Jan Morgan, filling in for a vacationing Paul Harrell. Paul, we've missed you and looking forward to you coming back on Monday. And man, I tell you what, this getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do the show is something else. But I am excited today that we have with us Steve Anderson, the superintendent of Lake Hamilton Schools here in Garland County, Arkansas. Of course, we're broadcasting from the Gun Cave Indoor Shooting Range. And as a firearms instructor and a gun enthusiast, I'm really excited that teachers on your school campus, and you're going to correct me because not all teachers, I guess you're going to say, but teachers on your campus can carry a gun for self-defense and to protect the kids. And in fact, you know, your school got the attention of the United States Attorney General, came to Garland County, Arkansas recently to visit this school and to talk with the superintendent about how things work. Maybe, hopefully, with the idea of this being a pilot program for schools across America to pattern after. I hope so.
Well, it was quite an honor to meet the Attorney General from the United States, from come to Piercy, Arkansas,
right?
To hear about a program we've had in place for 25 years, long before we heard much about school shootings. Actually, our school board and school administration put a program in place when the gang and violence issue in Little Rock was gaining national attention.
Right.
And so they. Because of where we're located, Jan, we're located in a spot where our law enforcement is provided by the Garland County Sheriff's Office, and they do a great job, wonderful job. But they've got a whole county to cover.
Right.
And where we're located, we're talking 20 to 30 minutes for a
response time. Sure.
So 25 years ago, the school board and administration at that time, I wasn't involved with that, but they found a little known law that let them get a license through the state of Arkansas as a private security company and let them hire a armed security guard to be on campus. That was much more economically feasible than a professional SRO with the Sheriff's Department.
Right.
We have one now, it's first year, but that's over $60,000. That's a teacher and a half in the school budget. But we do have an SRO on campus. Officer Ricky Huffman is doing a wonderful job. But back then, you didn't see a lot of SROs because of the response time. And because we're the largest school in Garland County, our school board felt like we needed a way to protect our students and our teachers. And so they took advantage of this law. Besides having a uniformed and armed officer who was basically an armed security guard, there were a number of school administrators that were licensed through the Arkansas State Police and trained, and they were private security officers.
So they go beyond the training of just the concealed handgun license, or they have to go through a different program.
A different program, much like Burns, HARP Security, various different foreign security or private security companies would be, and we had that license. Political differences of opinion on armed people on school campus hit the airwaves, and there were some political challenges and legal challenges, and eventually the Arkansas General Assembly took care of that problem, and they came up with a new license, and this is my license right here. This is a commissioned school security officer license, and it requires 60 hours of training, specific training in a number of areas, and for your initial license, and then every 2 years you have to be recertified, get this new the license renewed, and it's an additional 24 hours.
Okay.
And
can any teacher apply for this, or is it just people that the school district picks?
In your previous segment, we talked a lot about local control, and that's really where we're at. Different school districts approach this different ways. My friends up in Clarksville, Arkansas, Dr. David Hopkins approached me a number of years ago and said, "Hey, I know you guys have a way to arm a certain number of people on your campus. What do you do?" And so I made him aware of the program and what we do. They took it a little bit further than what we have at Lake Hamilton. They arm 20-something administrators and classroom teachers. At Lake Hamilton, we don't arm classroom teachers. They do not have this, and that's a local decision by the school board and the administration. But again, it's a local decision. Now, see, if
I was a teacher in your school, I'd say, "Well, I want to. I want to get."
And you know, we do have some that say, "Hey, if you ever expand this, we would be interested." You know, on the national front, we've heard a lot, and this gets so blown out of proportion of the way things really are. You know, people talking about, "Oh, they're going to force teachers to carry guns." Nobody in my circle has ever talked about forcing anybody to do something like that.
Right.
But we do have a number of people on our campus that are trained, including myself. Currently, you know, those numbers change depending on our staffing, but currently we have 3 licensed educators, myself and 2 other district level administrators that are around campus that are licensed and trained. Then we have our uniformed security officers that are armed, licensed, and trained. And then we have an undisclosed number of non-instructional employees that are licensed and trained. And we form what we call an emergency response team. And people say, "Well, you think you're police officers, or you think you're the SEAL teams." No, we don't. We know better than that. I've been famous saying some of my presentations, while we're not professional law enforcement, while we're not Navy SEALs, we're not military, we're a long ways from being Barney Fife also.
Right. Hey, I can attest to that, because I've seen a number of people from that school district. They've come to my range to practice and train, and those folks are serious. And I've seen this guy shoot. Can I tell people I've seen this guy shoot? Yes.
Helped me.
Yeah, well, I did. I like to say I sort of trained you. But yeah, this guy, we have, just so you know, we have here at the Gun Cave, in addition to the live fire range, we have a shooting simulation system, which I wish, you know, every person in law enforcement, every person who carries a gun in a business or in a school would get the opportunity to train on something like that, because it puts you in real scenarios. Big video screen, and all of a sudden, and there is actually an active shooter scenario on our system that I've seen you train in, and it's very difficult, but you got the bad guy in a high, pressure situation.
You know, I've been challenged before. I was doing a presentation in Biloxi, Mississippi just a few months ago, and I had a gentleman challenge me, "What makes you think that you haven't been in combat, you haven't been shot at? What makes you think you would react?" And I just have to say, I think my training prepares us. Like for a military or law enforcement, their training prepares them for those scenarios. And basically that's where we're at. We go above and beyond what's required by our license. We train, we come and we train some here. We also go down to another organization, Ed Monk. You may have know Ed Monk through the NRA. Ed has last resort firing range or shooting range down in Whitehall, Arkansas. We go down there every summer.
Good.
So it's a very intense live fire, which probably in 8 hours, we probably shoot anywhere between 500 and 600 rounds that day.
Mm-hmm.
They set up a shoot house, similar to a school situation.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, our training is very specific. We don't need to be a law enforcement officer that knows about writing speeding tickets and investigating things like that. Our scope is very specific.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is threatening the safety of our students or our staff, we respond to the threat.
Right.
And our job is specific. You respond to the threat and you isolate or eliminate that threat until the professional law enforcement officers can get there and take over. And at that point, I become a school teacher and start dealing with the aftermath of those types of situations.
Right.
We feel like that what we have in place and have had for 25 years is a deterrent,
mm-hmm.
for one thing. But, you know, the chances of something like this happening in a school are very slim. Our schools really are really safe. However, these things do happen.
It can happen. Well, Jonesboro, we did have a mass shooting in a school
exactly.
in Arkansas.
We have had, and we have to be prepared. Just like if someone's breaking in my home at night, I want a law enforcement officer
mm-hmm.
there, a professional there. But until they get there, I want to be able to take care of my wife and my child.
Right.
And that's what we're trained to do at Lake Hamilton with our emergency response team. And, you know, this program has been recognized. Congressman Bruce Westerman, following the shooting in Florida,
right.
Contacted me and asked me for some more information. And I gave it to him because he said, for rural schools, it's one of the best things and approaches I've seen out there. And he told me, you know, they're talking about it in the White House. They're talking about it in Congress.
Imagine that.
I was
little school out in the middle of rural Arkansas.
I actually was in Washington, D.C. for an superintendent association meeting this summer. And as I land, my secretary calls me and says, hey, the lady from the Department of Justice wants to talk to you. And she found out you were going to be in D.C. is trying to set up a meeting. So I had the opportunity not only to visit with my old fraternity brother, Congressman Womack from up in the northwest part of the state, but Congressman Westerman and some others. But I got to go to the Department of Justice. That was quite an experience. Mm-hmm. And they said that they had heard about our program and that the Attorney General was interested, along with the President's Federal Commission on School Safety, mm-hmm. coming and visiting Lake Hamilton and hearing about our program and seeing if it might be something that could be used for other schools across the nation. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we're going to talk about that visit after the break. But before we go to break, are there other things that you've done in your school to prepare for, other than training and arming teachers, like how to spot kids who may be having some mental issues that lead to this sort of thing?
You know, it'd be so nice if this was a one-facet problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's very complicated. I call it many different levels of the onion. We have, in fact, just recently done a very intense training with our entire staff, scenarios as far as what to look for, how to react in the case of an attack on our campus.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health, I think, is part of this situation.
And it's a part that nobody wants to talk about. When you talk about, mass shootings, the left always wants to go to the gun control issue. And I've said all along, we need to also be having a discussion about mental health, because that is in almost every mass shooting that has occurred in America, the shooter was either currently on or just coming off of psychotropic drugs. And I think that's something we just can't ignore. We need to have that discussion.
That, along with, I think that the breakdown of the American family,
yes,
and American traditional values contributes. We were talking before we went on the air about the video games,
mm-hmm.
and how some of those extremely violent video games may play a role in some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very complicated issue. I wish it was a simple answer, but
but the training at your school is it's many faceted,
and
multifaceted.
Multifaceted. We're looking at hardening, making it harder for outsiders to come in.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, if something like this were to happen at middle school, junior high, or high school, it's probably one of our students involved. The lower grades is probably an outsider. We have to look at those types of things. And, you know, we've got video cameras. We've got great communication. We're increasing our security and safety out there. So it's just, this is one facet of a multifaceted approach of protecting our kids.
Okay, so we have to go to break, but when we come back, we're going to talk with Steve because I'm anxious to hear about the United States Attorney General's visit, what he had to say, and what he seemed most interested in. And I think you're going to find this really interesting. So stay with us.
Require nearly $10 billion for investment. By 1985, the figure would be nearly $45 billion. These changes are essential to provide the new investment which is needed to create millions of new jobs between now and 1985, and to make America competitive once again in the world market. Now, these won't be make-work jobs. They're productive jobs, jobs with a future. I'm well aware that there are many other desirable and needed tax changes, such as indexing the income tax brackets to protect taxpayers against inflation, the unjust discrimination against married couples if both are working and earning, tuition tax credits, the unfairness of the inheritance tax, especially to the family-owned farm and the family-owned business, and a number of others. But our program for economic recovery is so urgently needed to begin to bring down inflation that I'm asking you to act on this plan first and with great urgency. And then I pledge I will join with you in seeking these additional tax changes at the earliest date possible. American society experienced a virtual explosion in government regulation during the past decade. Between 1970 and 1979, expenditures for the major regulatory agencies quadrupled. The number of pages published annually in the Federal Register nearly tripled. And the number of pages in the Code of Federal Regulations increased by nearly 2/3. The result has been higher prices, higher unemployment, and lower productivity growth. Overregulation causes small and independent businessmen and women, as well as large businesses, to defer or terminate plans for expansion, and since they're responsible for most of the new jobs, those new jobs just aren't created. Now, we have no intention of dismantling the regulatory agencies, especially those necessary to protect the environment and assure the public health and safety. However, we must come to grips with inefficient and burdensome regulations, eliminate those we can, and reform the others. I have asked Vice President Bush to head a cabinet-level task force on regulatory relief. Second, I asked each member of my cabinet to postpone the effective dates of the hundreds of new regulations which have not yet been implemented. Third, in coordination with the task force, many of the agency heads have already taken prompt action to review and rescind existing burdensome regulations. And finally, just yesterday, I signed an executive order that for the first time provides for effective and coordinated management of the regulatory process. Much has been accomplished, but it's only a beginning. We will eliminate those regulations that are unproductive and unnecessary by executive order where possible and cooperate fully with you on those that require legislation. The final aspect of our plan requires a national monetary policy which does not allow money growth to increase consistently faster than the growth of goods and services. In order to curb inflation, we need to slow the growth in our money supply. Now, we fully recognize the independence of the Federal Reserve System. We'll do nothing to interfere with or undermine that independence. We will consult regularly with the Federal Reserve Board on all aspects of our economic program and will vigorously pursue budget policies that'll make their job easier in reducing monetary growth. A successful program to achieve stable and moderate growth patterns in the money supply will keep both inflation and interest rates down and restore vigor to our financial institutions and markets. This, then, is our proposal, America's New Beginning, a program for economic recovery. I don't want it to be simply the plan of my administration. I'm here tonight to ask you to join me in making it our plan. Together, we can embark on this road.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We have been talking before the break with one of my favorite folks. He's a superintendent of schools, Steve Anderson, superintendent of schools at Lake Hamilton, and we've been talking about the fact that they had a visit recently by the United States Attorney General because of a program they have which allows certain school personnel, a number of school personnel, in fact, he has said an undisclosed number, school personnel who are highly trained to carry guns on campus. So, I guess the United States Attorney General was interested and hopefully is going to turn this into something that schools across the nation can consider. But I want to know, how was his visit? What was that like?
Well, I was surprised.
Okay.
To begin with, Congressman Westerman had told me that in the White House and in the halls of Congress, they were talking about our program. And I actually was in D.C. and I saw him. He introduced me to other congressmen from different states, and said, "This is the guy that's in charge of that school I was telling you about." And so I thought, well, it's really happening. Well, then I got called to the Department of Justice, and they wanted to come visit. It suddenly became not a Lake Hamilton or even an Arkansas program because FBI, Secret Service, all kinds of police and law enforcement were there and basically took over. But Attorney General Sessions, I was pleasantly surprised. He put me at ease. He's
from Alabama.
Country boy from Alabama, but I didn't really grasp that at the beginning. And I said something to him about, you're in Piercy, Arkansas. I know we're a lot smaller. And he said, "Mr. Anderson, I grew up and graduated with 30 kids in my class." So he really put me at ease.
Right.
They were very interested in what we've done. And also understanding that what we say is our program is not right for everybody. For inner city schools, no. For schools that have quick response, law enforcement right there in their town, this probably wouldn't fit. But for rural schools in Arkansas and possibly for other parts of the country.
I don't know. If I was a school teacher in an inner city school, I would beg to differ because as we saw in the Parkland shooting, the law enforcement was right there, but sometimes they're just not effective enough. And I, as a teacher, I wouldn't want to have to depend on someone else to save my life and my students' lives. I want the right to take care of them myself.
Well, that's kind of the way our school district 25 years ago, our board said, we want to put some people in place that we know that
they're going to be here
with our campus. They're going to be here. That have quick access to
who have attachments to these kids, who know these kids
that aren't going to be trigger happy.
Right.
And I say to our staff when we're training, if we pull the trigger, we can't call that chunk of lead back.
No.
We know that even though there's a bad guy there, there's a lot of good kids, good guys out there too, good kids. So
have you had a negligent discharge, or some people call it an accidental shooting? I have a problem with that because it's not an accident if your gun goes off and you didn't mean it. So it's 25 years. Any accidental shootings on your campus, but with teachers not being responsible with their firearms or administrators?
No. And to that, we've never even had to draw one. But
it's because your folks are armed. Is why you've never had to draw ones.
But we're prepared to protect our folks. And folks from the Attorney General, from Homeland Security, from the Department of Education, from Health and Human Services, they were all there, as well as Congressman Westerman. People from the state government were there. And it was a very good meeting. We had parents, we had teachers represented, and were involved in the roundtable discussion with the Attorney General. And afterwards, the young lady that helped set this up through the Department of Justice sent me a text.
Running out of time.
Said it was very good.
Good
reviews from the Attorney General.
Good. Awesome. Well, I hope that he takes those reviews, and I hope that maybe we'll see teachers across America and administrators in schools across America be able to arm themselves to protect their school, to protect the kids, and to protect themselves. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Steve Anderson, Superintendent of Lake Hamilton Schools, making the national news. We'll be back.
you very much. I should have arranged to quit right there. Well, together, we can embark on this road not to make things easy, but to make things better. Our social, political, and cultural, as well as our economic institutions, can no longer absorb the repeated shocks that have been dealt them over the past decades. Can we do the job? The answer is yes, but we must begin now. We're in control here. There's nothing wrong with America that together we can't fix. I'm sure there'll be some who'll raise the familiar old cry, don't touch my program, cut somewhere else. I hope I've made it plain that our approach has been even-handed, that the only programs for the programs for the truly deserving needy remain untouched. The question is, are we simply going to go down the same path we've gone down before, carving out one special program here, another special program there? I don't think that's what the American people expect of us. More important, I don't think that's what they want. They're ready to return to the source of our strength. The substance and prosperity of our nation is built by wages brought home from the factories and the mills, the farms and the shops. They are the services provided in 10,000 corners of America, the interest on the thrift of our people, and in the returns for their risk-taking. The production of America is the possession of those who build, serve, create, and produce. For too long now, we've removed from our people the decisions on how to dispose of what they created. We've strayed from first principles. We must alter our course. The taxing power of government must be used to provide revenues for legitimate government purposes. It must not be used to regulate the economy or bring about social change. We've tried that, and surely we must be able to see it doesn't work. Spending by government must be limited to those functions which are the proper province of government. We can no longer afford things simply because we think of them. Next year, we can reduce the budget by $41.4 billion without harm to government's legitimate purposes or to our responsibility to all who need our benevolence. This, plus the reduction in tax rates, will help bring an end to inflation. In the health and social services area alone, the plan we're proposing will substantially reduce the need for 465 pages of law, 1,400 pages of regulations, 5,000 federal employees who presently administer 7,600 separate grants in about 25,000 separate locations. Over 7 million man and woman hours of work by state and local officials are required to fill out government forms. I would direct a question to those who have indicated already an unwillingness to accept such a plan. Have they an alternative which offers a greater chance of balancing the budget, reducing and eliminating inflation, stimulating the creation of jobs, and reducing the tax burden? And if they haven't, are they suggesting we can continue on the present course without coming to a day of reckoning? If we don't do this, inflation and the growing tax burden will put an end to everything we believe in and our dreams for the future. We don't have an option of living with inflation and its attendant tragedy. Millions of productive
So much for being with us at Conduit News. We have got an action-packed remainder of the show. We've got some wonderful guests, and one of them is with us right now. We have Chris Ann Hall. Chris Ann is a constitutional attorney, and Chris Ann, you were just on Fox and Friends yesterday, in New York, and then now you're here with us. We're honored to have you with us. Are you there?
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you. I don't know if you were able to listen, but before the break, we were talking with the attorney of Lake Hamilton Schools, not the attorney, excuse me, the superintendent of Lake Hamilton Schools. Their school district recently was examined closely by the United States Attorney General as a possible model for schools across America. And if you're not familiar with the Lake Hamilton School, they have a special training program through state police where a number of their administrators and school personnel, and they call it an undisclosed number, are actually able to carry guns on the school campus if they get that special license that shows they've been through this extra training program. And I'm wondering if that becomes something that we see nationally, do you think that there will be maybe some school teachers who don't get asked to do that might say, well, what about my constitutional right to arm myself? Do you think eventually we might get to the point where we'll see a school teacher stand up and say, look, I have a constitutional right to defend myself, and it doesn't end when my car drives on this school campus?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's part of the problem that we have with the federal government getting involved in programs like this. The federal government's got no business being involved in our local school programs and our local state and issues. As a matter of fact, the federal government has no business being involved in anything with schools or anything with guns. And so when they try to create standards and make a sweeping swath across the country, doing things that they're not only not authorized to do but prohibited to do, that's when you have the rights of the people being usurped based on the judgment of the federal government.
Somehow I knew you were going to say that, and that's why I wanted you to weigh in on this conversation, because I know that you are all about state sovereignty and states' rights. And a lot of governors of states around America don't realize how much constitutional authority they have, and sheriffs around the country don't realize how much constitutional power they have in their county, more so than the president of the United States. And so, I think there's so many states that just assume that because the federal government says you can't do this, that maybe they can't. So it is, in your view, it is a states' rights issue.
Oh, absolutely. But not only just the states' rights issue, but the purpose of the states' rights issue. Our founders made it perfectly clear when they were drafting the Constitution, and even more relevant when they were ratifying the Constitution, that these were limitations to be placed on the federal government in order to secure the rights of the people. And in securing the rights of the people, it is absolutely incumbent upon the states to include their governors and to include their state legislators to make sure that they are limiting the federal government so that the rights of the people are secure. When the federal government is not limited in its power, then, and even in just one instance, then there is no limit to federal government power. And when there is no limit to federal government power, then the Constitution becomes practically null and void, and the federal government's only limit becomes whatever they can design for themselves. And when that happens, we cease being a constitutional republic, and the people's rights are imperiled.
Exactly. Well, on that note, the red flag law is being examined. Last time I checked, by at least 14 states say they are considering it. And of particular interest to me is that our governor in our state, there was a recent investigative report by one of our statewide newspapers that sort of led to this big discussion of maybe something needs to be done in Arkansas. We need to look at the red flag law. And I was very disappointed when our Republican governor said that he would be willing to consider it, willing to examine it. Of course, he said, we have to look at this due process thing, though. Well, my view is, there's nothing to examine. It's not we're going down a slippery slope if we allow this. It's a direct hit on the constitutional rights. Can you talk to the people a little bit about the red flag law and what's wrong with it and why no state should be looking at it under any circumstances?
Yeah, these red flag laws are known in the legal field as gun restraining orders. And basically what they do is they put a single magistrate in charge of determining whether a person is fit to secure their rights or not. And what happens is that somebody, based just simply on accusation or and it doesn't have to involve any type of evidence or proof. There's no due process in this situation whatsoever. that goes to a judge and says, this person has threatened me, this person is dangerous, and then with a swipe of a pen, with no presence of the person under accusation, their rights to keep and bear arms are removed, and then the sheriff or the local law enforcement is then authorized by that judge to seize the weapons of whomever that person is, and then the person is left to prove their innocence. It really is a swapping of the principles of America, the natural right to keep and bear arms and the right to be innocent until proven guilty.
Yes, it is. So, you know, when that became a big news story in Arkansas, that our governor was willing to even consider this and look at it, examine it for our state, there was a quick backlash. And I know that the governor of Texas did the same thing. He actually put it in his list of you know, things he wanted to get accomplished. And once that became apparent, the people of Texas, there was such a tremendous backlash that he had to back out of that and pull out. And I'm hoping that we have the same kind of backlash here, so that our legislators and our governor know the red flag law on many fronts, because it is a violation of the first, well, some people would say it's the first, the second, the fourth, and the fifth amendments. And some people even argue it covers, it's a violation of more of those amendments. But listen, I'm excited that you're going to be coming to Arkansas.
Yes, that's going to be great. And I before we move on, Jan, I really want to impress upon the people just what an awful thing these gun restraining orders are. There are ways to do this without denying due process. And we as a people have to realize how important due process is, especially when we're considering the securing of our rights. These gun restraining orders are the epitome of absolute despotism, and it's not something that we should consider when we're trying to find solutions to our problems.
Well, because you're guilty until proven innocent. And then there's that slippery slope of who gets to decide what is mentally incompetent. And my argument is that if you are a psychologist, I guess a psychologist, if the judge recommends that you be evaluated, so a psychologist is going to get to decide whether or not you're mentally competent, that you're not insane, and that you can keep your guns, or you can actually get your guns back, because they're going to take them away first. And then what if that psychologist is an anti-gun person and thinks America would be better off if nobody had guns, and then suggests that maybe you need counseling, that you have anger issues. I mean, I could just see this turning into a nightmare, and it just leaves so much room for abuse of power. And it scares me, it frightens me that even in a state where we have total control, Republicans have control of the Senate, the House, and the governor's office, that we're even looking at this. Because I was hoping when the governor was approached with this that he would have just said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're talking about violations of the rights of the people on many fronts. And so, no, there's nothing to discuss here. But I guess we may be discussing it after all. I wanted to cover this real quickly with you because we're all out of
that way in Florida.
Yes,
and ahead, please, I'm sorry.
Okay, you're coming to Arkansas in February,
yes.
But I wanted to give people a heads up to start looking for this. You're going to be traveling throughout the state of Arkansas. We have you, I think, appearing in 3 or 4 or 5 different cities. I know you're going to be in Hot Springs in Garland County at least one day, maybe possibly 2. So I'm really excited about that. We're looking forward to seeing you here at the Gun Cave. So what is the best way for them to find out, other than on our pages, what you're going to be talking about while you're here?
chrisannhall.com/calendar, or just simply go to chrisannhall.com and click on our calendar page. It's KRISANNEHALL.com. And this will be our, the second month of our Liberty Tour 2019, and we're so very, very excited. And, you can, when you come to one of our courses, I was just on a Dan Abrams national network called Law and Crime with 2 lawyers actually discussing Kavanaugh. And just to give you an indication, these 2 lawyers, one of them was a candidate for Attorney General in Virginia. They said, Chrisanne, it's just so amazing how you are a lawyer, but you don't speak like a lawyer. You just break things down in such a way that it makes people, it's easy for people to understand. these principles that Americans have thought were complicated. And I think that's part of the gift of what we do. So we will bring to you the truth that has been hidden for us for decades about how simple it is to understand the Constitution and how essential it is to secure our rights.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to that. KrisAnne Hall, constitutional attorney, coming to Arkansas. Thank you, KrisAnne. Thank you for what you do on the national front for all the people of America fighting for our constitutional rights. We'll see you later. Folks, we will be posting information about her visit to Arkansas, so be sure to look on my Facebook page, the Patriots of Act 746 page, and of course, KrisAnne gave her website address as well. So when we come back, we're going to have a final chat with Joey McCutcheon about issue 1. Big decision made yesterday that affects that very controversial issue. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
We share in restoring the promise that is offered to every citizen by this, the last best hope of man on earth. All of us are aware of the punishing inflation which has, for the first time in 60 years, held to double-digit figures for 2 years in a row. Interest rates have reached absurd levels of more than 20% and over 15% for those who would borrow to buy a home. All across this land, one can see newly built homes standing vacant, unsold, because of mortgage interest rates. Almost 8 million Americans are out of work. These are people who want to be productive. But as the months go by, despair dominates their lives. The threats of layoff and unemployment hang over other millions, and all who work are frustrated by their inability to keep up with inflation. One worker in a Midwest city put it to me this way. He said, "I'm bringing home more dollars than I ever believed I could possibly earn, but I seem to be getting worse off." And he is. Not only have hourly earnings of the American worker, after adjusting for inflation, declined 5% over the past 5 years. But in these 5 years, federal personal taxes for the average family have increased 67%. We can no longer procrastinate and hope that things will get better. They will not. Unless we act forcefully, and now, the economy will get worse. Can we who man the ship of state deny it is somewhat out of control? Our national debt is approaching $1 trillion. A few weeks ago, I called such a figure, $1 trillion, incomprehensible. And I've been trying ever since to think of a way to illustrate how big $1 trillion really is. And the best I could come up with is that if you had a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand, only 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high. The interest on the public debt this year, we know, will be over $90 billion. And unless we change the proposed spending for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, we'll add another almost $80 billion to the debt. Adding to our troubles is a mass of regulations imposed on the shopkeeper, the farmer, the craftsman, professionals, and major industry that is estimated to add $100 billion to the price of the things we buy, and it reduces our ability to produce. The rate of increase in American productivity, once one of the highest in the world, is among the lowest of all major industrial nations. Indeed, it has actually declined in the last 3 years. Now, I've painted a pretty grim picture.
If you believe the Second Amendment protects your right to defend your home with a firearm, where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government. And the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed roller lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
But I think I've painted it accurately. It is within our power to change this picture, and we can act with hope. There's nothing wrong with our internal strengths. There has been no breakdown in the human, technological, and natural resources upon which the economy is built. Based on this confidence in a system which has never failed us, but which we have failed through a lack of confidence and sometimes through a belief that we could fine-tune the economy and get a tune to our liking, I am proposing a comprehensive 4-point program. Now let me outline in detail some of the principal parts of this program. You'll each be provided with a completely detailed copy of the entire program. This plan is aimed at reducing the growth in government spending and taxing, reforming and eliminating regulations which are unnecessary and unproductive or counterproductive, and encouraging a consistent monetary policy aimed at maintaining the value of the currency. If enacted in full, this program can help America create 13 million new jobs, nearly 3 million more than we would have without these measures. It will also help us to gain control of inflation. It's important to note that we're only reducing the rate of increase in taxing and spending. We are not attempting to cut either spending or taxing levels below that which we presently have. This plan will get our economy moving again, productivity growth, and thus create the jobs that our people must have. And I'm asking that you join me in reducing direct federal spending by $41.4 billion in fiscal year 1982, along with another And this goes along with another $7.7 billion in user fees and off-budget savings for a total of $49.1 billion. And this will still allow an increase of $40.8 billion over 1981 spending. Now, I know that exaggerated and inaccurate stories about these cuts have disturbed many people, particularly those dependent on grant and benefit programs for their basic needs. Some of you have heard from constituents I know, afraid that Social Security checks, for example, were going to be taken away from them. Well, I regret the fear that these unfounded stories have caused, and I welcome this opportunity to set things straight. We will continue to fulfill the obligations that spring from our national conscience. Those who, through no fault of their own, must depend on the rest of us, the poverty-stricken, the disabled, the elderly, all those with true need.
Okay, I always enjoy listening to President Reagan. Okay, so we're back, and with us once again is Joey McCutcheon. He has been at the forefront of the battle against Issue 1 in Arkansas. And yesterday was a big day on that battlefront because a judge he ordered that this issue 1 was unconstitutional and that it must be removed from the ballot. So, Joey, here I was thinking you would be jumping for joy because you and people like Michelle, who is with Women of Arkansas Against issue 1, you've worked so hard to educate people and to stop this to stop the voters from making the wrong decision here. So, but yet you say you're not jumping for joy. What's with that?
Because we can't go to sleep. I mean, because the Supreme Court, we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. We assume that the folks who are pressing for an arbitrary value on life and all of these things in issue 1, that they're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. We don't know what the Supreme Court will do, number 1. So we can't go to sleep, Jan. We've got to continue to educate. We've got to continue to speak. We've got to prepare because we want to win this thing at the ballot. We want to win it with the people, Jan. That's so important that we win this fight with the people voting.
But Joey, for example, in the May primary, only 18% of registered voters in this state bothered to even vote. So you have to worry, if this remains on the ballot, you have to worry, will enough people be educated on this issue to understand what's at stake, or will they fall for any misinformation that's been put out there about what this really does? Because there's been a lot of information out there. For example, you had various the other side of this issue is saying, oh, this is going to draw more business into our state and our economy is suffering, so we need more business. This is good for business. In fact, it was good for Texas business. So isn't there this fear that if it does get on the ballot, that not enough people will know what's going on and be educated enough to make the decision that you would want them to make?
Well, I trust Arkansans. We Arkies aren't as dumb as some of the elitists would try to intimate. But I trust people, just like I trust people on juries to make decisions when a person, for example, Vicki Jansen, Jan, who was a client of mine, I lived 12 years as a vent-dependent quadriplegic after the negligence of Ford and Firestone. I trust the people to make those decisions about is $500,000 fair for a vent-dependent quadriplegic who never got to hold her Down syndrome child again. So I trust people, and I think we've got to continue. You make a good point. We've got to continue to educate because the falsehood that the other side is putting out is miraculous, and we've got to expose the lies. I mean, it's apple pie and Chevrolet. I mean, we've got the lowest unemployment rate since 1969 in the state of Arkansas. The proponents of this, they recognize that we've got jobs in Arkansas. If you listen to Randy Zook said we just don't have the workforce to fulfill the job. So this isn't about.
Yeah, that's not only in Arkansas. That's not only in Arkansas. That's around the country. That's not only in Arkansas. We've got more jobs than we've got people.
This is about classic government overreach. I mean, what Judge Mackey Pierce ruled shows another government overreach, trying to jam 4 amendments within issue 1, and it violated our Constitution. How many times are special interests who drafted issue 1, how many times are they going to violate our Constitution? I'm thankful for our Constitution, Jan. A Constitution, Article 5, Section 32, which says a legislature cannot limit damages. That's the only reason that the people are getting to vote now, is because our founding fathers saw that the railroads were corrupt in 1874. And now it's the big-time nursing home industries who are pushing this. Let's not forget about a nursing home owner who gave Jake Files an $80,000 wire transfer. Are those the people, that senators who will take bribes, are those the ones we want drafting our court rules or drafting issue 1, which is looks like clearly unconstitutional?
Yes, sir. Well, Joey, thank you so much for all you've done on the battlefront there, and good luck with getting us on the ballot. That's what you want. Thank you so much for joining us. We're running out of time, folks, but this all brings into question, or brings back to the forefront that issue of, those who are willing to give up liberty for the sake of security or for the sake of jobs, big industry, deserve neither and we'll lose both. We're out of time. Paul Harrell back here next week. Thank you so much for putting up with me for the week. We'll see you. Bye-bye.